In the middle of a busy street, an unexpected crash brings together two completely different worlds. What seemed like just an accident turned out to be the start of something much bigger. Between coffee cups, little notes, and tough choices, their lives collide in a life-changing way. And just when everything seemed settled, a twist changed their fate forever. Before you dive into this inspiring story, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our heartfelt stories. Under the morning sun reflecting off skyscraper windows, a young woman in a stained apron pushed her small business cart along crowded sidewalks. While talking to her elderly grandmother on the phone, distracted, she lost control of the cart, which rolled straight into the gleaming exterior of a foreign car. The caramel coating spread like paint on a surreal canvas. "Grandma, I have to go. A disaster just happened," whispered Lucy, her wide eyes fixed on the brown stain dripping down the silver paint of the imported vehicle. The man who emerged from the car looked like he'd stepped from the pages of a business magazine. Impeccable suit, perfectly arranged hair, and an unfriendly expression that made Lucy swallow hard. He observed the damage with an icy gaze before turning his attention to her. "Do you have any idea of the value of this car?" he asked, his voice controlled but clearly irritated. Lucy took a deep breath. Her small cart of coffee and artisanal sweets was her only source of income, the result of 2 years saving every penny after losing her formal job. She had no way to pay for repairs to a car worth more than everything she had ever owned in her life. "I'm very sorry, sir. It truly wasn't my intention." She tried to keep her voice steady. "Unfortunately, I can't pay for the repairs immediately, but what?" he interrupted, looking at his wristwatch that probably cost the equivalent of a year of her rent. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. That's when an idea formed in Lucy's mind. She didn't have money, but she had skill and determination. "I can pay my debt by delivering coffee and my artisanal sweets to your office every day," she proposed, surprising herself with her boldness. "For however long it takes to cover the repair costs." The man stared at her, as if she had suggested something absurd. Lucy noticed people passing by, casting curious glances at the scene. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "My name is Lucy Fields," she extended her hand, ignoring his comment. "And you are?" He hesitated for a moment before briefly shaking her hand. "Edward Miller. Mr. Miller. I know it seems like a strange proposal," continued Lucy, taking advantage of his momentary receptiveness. "But my products are really good. I have loyal customers who can confirm that." Edward looked at the small cart decorated with hand-painted flowers. The display cases showed meticulously crafted treats, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air around them. "Look," she continued, taking a small notebook from her apron pocket. "Here's my number. Please send me the repair estimate. I promise I won't run from my responsibility." Something in her determined look made him hesitate. For a moment his expression softened. "1 month," he said finally. "1 month of daily deliveries to my office. If your products are really as good as you say, I'll consider the debt paid." Lucy couldn't hide her surprise. "Really?" "Phoenix Building, 30th floor, Miller Enterprises," he responded, taking a card from his pocket. "Tomorrow at 8 in this morning. Don't be late." Before she could thank him, Edward was already on his cell phone, probably calling someone to solve the car problem. Lucy kept the card as if it were a treasure and tried to reorganize her cart again, still stunned by the unexpected turn of events. The next morning, Lucy woke up 2 hours earlier than usual. She carefully prepared her best treats: pistachio, macarons, brownies with caramelized walnuts, and mini honey cakes with Belgian chocolate coating, the latter being her specialty. The coffee was selected from the finest beans she could afford, roasted to perfection. Upon arriving at the imposing Phoenix Building, she felt her stomach turn. The contrast between her simple cart and the sumptuousness of the place couldn't be greater. At reception, the security guard looked at her with suspicion. "I have a delivery for Mr. Edward Miller, 30th floor," she said, trying to sound professional. "Is your name on the list?" he questioned, typing something into the computer. To her surprise, it was. The security guard gave her a visitor badge and indicated the exclusive elevator to the executive floor. Inside it, Lucy nervously adjusted her apron and checked her reflection in the mirror. Her curly hair was tied in a simple bun, and she had applied only a discreet lipstick. She wanted to look professional, despite the unusual circumstances. Upon reaching the indicated floor, she was greeted by a receptionist with an impeccable appearance, who analyzed her from head to toe. "Ah, you must be the pastry chef," said the woman, as if carefully choosing the word. "Mr. Miller is on a call, but he asked for you to leave the delivery in his office. This way." Lucy followed the receptionist through the elegant corridors, feeling the curious looks from employees. Edward's office was spacious, with a panoramic view of the city. That made Lucy hold her breath for a moment. "How you can arrange everything on that side table," instructed the receptionist, pointing to a space near the window. "He'll be here in a few minutes." Lucy meticulously organized each item. She arranged the sweets on a tray she'd brought from home, served coffee in an elegant thermos, a gift from her grandmother, and set everything ready with cloth napkins she had hand-embroidered. The door opened, and Edward entered, still on the phone. He gestured with his head, acknowledging her presence while finishing the call. Lucy stood still, not quite sure if she should introduce herself or wait for instructions. "Good morning," he said finally after ending the call. "I see you really showed up." "I always keep my promises, Mr. Miller," Lucy replied, trying not to show her nervousness. Edward approached the table and examined the sweets. "All of this was made by you?" "Yes, every detail," she confirmed with a touch of pride in her voice. "I recommend starting with the honey cake. It pairs perfectly with the coffee." To her surprise, he picked up one of the small honey cakes and took a bite. His serious countenance remained unchanged for a few seconds, until a slight raising of his eyebrows betrayed some reaction. "It's acceptable," he commented, taking a cup and serving himself some coffee. Lucy contained a smile. Acceptable, coming from a man like Edward, probably equaled high praise. "Tomorrow I'll bring something different," she promised. "I have several specialties." "All right," he replied, checking his watch again. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a video conference in 5 minutes. "Of course," Lucy nodded, collecting her bag. "I'll be here tomorrow, same time." When she was almost at the door, his voice stopped her. "Miss Fields." She turned, surprised that he had remembered her last name. "The sweets are better than acceptable," said Edward, with what could have been the outline of a smile. "Actually, they're quite good." That small comment made Lucy smile all day. In the following weeks, a strange routine was established. Every morning, punctually at 8 o'clock, Lucy arrived at the 30th floor with her creations of the day. Gradually, the employees became accustomed to her presence, and some even began to make private orders, impressed with the sweets that occasionally were left over from the delivery for the boss. The receptionist, who introduced herself as Rebecca, gradually abandoned her suspicious air and began to greet her with genuine smiles. One day, while waiting to enter Edward's office, Rebecca confided in her. "You know he's never allowed regular deliveries to the office before, right?" she commented, lowering her voice. "Not even from the best bakery in the city." "I imagine it's just because of the agreement we made," replied Lucy, feeling her cheeks blush slightly. "Maybe," Rebecca smiled with complicity. "But he's also never praised food in front of others, and yesterday I heard him comment to the finance director about your almond croissants." The interactions with Edward were also subtly changing. In the beginning, he barely raised his eyes from the documents when she arrived. Then he began to ask specific questions about the sweets. Next, small comments about the weather, news of the day. Until, in the 3rd week, something unexpected happened. "How did you learn to make all this?" he asked, while savoring a raspberry. "Macaron." The question caught Lucy by surprise. It was the first time Edward had shown interest in something beyond the sweets themselves. "From my grandmother," she answered, organizing the cups she had brought. "She was a pastry chef her whole life. When my parents—" She hesitated for a moment. "When I came under her care, we spent hours in the kitchen. It was our way of dealing with the situation." Edward observed her for a moment, as if he was really seeing her for the first time. "Did you formally study culinary arts?" "I started the course but had to abandon it in the 2nd year," Lucy answered. without going into details about the financial difficulties that forced her to leave college. But I learned a lot in the places I worked afterward. And how did the idea for the cart come about? After I lost my job at the Central Mall bakery, she explained, I realized I needed to create my own opportunity. I saved for months working as a waitress, bought the cart used and completely renovated it. It was difficult at first, but gradually I won loyal customers. Edward nodded, seeming truly interested. It's impressive what you've accomplished with limited resources, he commented, serving himself more coffee. Many of my executives with all the available capital don't demonstrate half that determination. The unexpected compliment made Lucy blush. Thank you, she responded simply, not knowing how to react. I'm curious, he continued, leaning back in his chair. What would you do if you had access to more resources? Would you expand the business? I have many dreams, admitted Lucy, becoming animated with the topic. I'd like to have a fixed space, a small cafe where I could create a welcoming environment. Hire some people from my community who need opportunities, maybe even go back to school to specialize in French pastry. There was a sparkle in her eyes while she spoke that didn't go unnoticed by Edward. For a moment, he just observed her, as if he were absorbing not just her words, but all the energy and passion behind them. The phone on the desk rang, breaking the moment. I need to answer, he said, returning to his professional posture. Thank you for today's delivery. Lucy nodded and headed to the door. Before leaving, however, Edward called her again. Miss Fields, she turned. I'm holding an important corporate event next week. I'd like you to provide the sweets for the coffee break. It would be paid work, separate from our original agreement. Rebecca will pass you the details if you're interested. Lucy could barely contain her joy. Though of course it would be an honor, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Upon leaving the office, she found Rebecca smiling at her. Looks like someone finally melted the ice of our dear boss, joked the receptionist. It's just work, replied Lucy, trying not to give it importance, but feeling her heart accelerate for reasons she preferred not to analyze at that moment. On the way to the elevator, she couldn't help but notice how the intimidating environment of the 30th floor didn't affect her as much anymore. Her thoughts, however, were occupied with something completely new. The strange sensation she had experienced upon seeing Edward Miller, the ruthless businessman, looking at her with what appeared to be genuine admiration. What had begun as an embarrassing accident was slowly transforming into something she couldn't define. And for the first time since she had started those deliveries, Lucy wondered what would happen when the month came to an end. The corporate event at Miller Enterprises was much larger than Lucy had imagined. When Rebecca sent the details by email, she almost choked on her coffee. It would be necessary to prepare sweets for 200 people, including potential international investors and representatives from partner companies. The date was scheduled for 5 days from then. Her small suburban apartment couldn't accommodate a production of that size. Lucy spent the night wide awake, making calculations and trying to find a solution. That's when she remembered Gina, her former boss at the Central Mall bakery, with whom she maintained contact, despite the forced dismissal due to the financial crisis of the establishment. The next morning, after making her usual delivery to Edward, she called Gina. I need a miracle, she said after explaining the situation. Can I use your bakery space during the night? I'll pay for the use of the equipment. Better than that, replied Gina with enthusiasm. I can help you with the production. Business has been slow and some extra money would be welcome. Besides, I miss working with you, you crazy perfectionist. With the help secured, Lucy began to plan the menu. She wanted to impress, to show her true potential. It wouldn't be just a debt repayment, but an opportunity to expand her business. In the days leading up to the event, she slept only the essential. She spent her mornings making regular deliveries to fixed customers and to Edward, her afternoons preparing doughs and bases that could be frozen, and her nights at the bakery with Gina, finishing everything that was possible to advance. The eve of the event, while finalizing the last preparations, Gina observed the deep circles under her friend's eyes. You're killing yourself for this job, she commented, concerned. Is it really worth it? Lucy paused, hands covered in confectioner's sugar. "It's not just for the money," she admitted. "It's the chance to show my work to people who would normally never know my sweet cart." "And it has nothing to do with this Edward Miller?" teased Gina, raising an eyebrow. Lucy felt her face heat up. "It's strictly professional," she replied, focusing on decorating a petit gâteau with more attention than necessary. "He's just different than I imagined at first." "Different how?" insisted her friend. "He seems to really value dedication and hard work," explained Lucy. "In the last few days he's been asking me about the cart, about how I manage the business alone. Yesterday he even suggested some suppliers who could offer quality ingredients for better prices." Gina smiled enigmatically. "Seems like Mr. Executive is quite interested in your small business. Or maybe he's just trying to ensure I complete the month of deliveries with quality," retorted Lucy, trying to push away thoughts that had been occupying her sleepless nights. The day of the event arrived. Lucy rented a small van to transport everything to the luxurious hotel where the reception would be held. Her nerves were on edge when she entered through the service entrance, following the directions received. The event hall was being decorated with elegant arrangements in blue and gold tones. Uniformed staff moved efficiently, preparing everything to receive the illustrious guests. Lucy felt completely out of place in her simple dress, the best she owned but still far inferior to the standard she observed around her. Rebecca appeared to receive her, wearing an elegant business outfit that screamed, "Successful executive." "You made it!" she exclaimed, genuinely happy to see Lucy. Edward was worried it might be too much work with too little notice. "He was worried?" asked Lucy, surprised, as they began to unload the boxes. "More than he would admit," replied Rebecca, with a knowing smile. "Yesterday I heard him asking the event manager 3 times if they had confirmed your arrival and if they had reserved adequate space for you to set everything up." This information intrigued Lucy, but there was no time for digressions. Soon the area reserved for the coffee break began to come to life with her creations. Macarons in soft shades of blue, matching the decoration, mini fruit tarts, Belgian chocolate bonbons with exclusive fillings, and her specialty, the honey cakes that had conquered even Edward Miller's demanding palate. When she finished the setup, Rebecca stopped by her side, admiring the result. "This looks absolutely stunning," she commented. "I can't wait to see the guests' reaction." "And your bosses," added Lucy, unable to disguise her expectation. The event began at 7 p.m. sharp. From the small area reserved for suppliers, Lucy could discreetly observe the hall. Executives in formal attire circulated with champagne flutes, engaged in conversations that certainly involved astronomical figures. At the center of one of the most crowded circles was Edward Miller. He seemed in his natural element, conversing with ease and charisma that Lucy had never witnessed during her morning deliveries. He wore an impeccably tailored navy blue suit that enhanced his broad shoulders and elegant posture. Occasionally he smiled, something he rarely did in the office, revealing an expression that made him almost irresistible. "What am I thinking?" Lucy mentally reprimanded herself, looking away. The coffee break moment was announced, and Lucy positioned herself discreetly behind the tables, ready to replenish the sweets as needed. She felt her heart race when the first guests approached. The comments didn't take long to emerge. "Divine. Where did you find this service? The presentation is worthy of a magazine." An elegant lady with gleaming jewelry stopped in front of Lucy. "Are you responsible for these delights?" she asked, holding a macaron with approval. "Yes, ma'am," replied Lucy, trying to appear professional despite her nervousness. "Simply extraordinary," praised the woman. "That red fruit tart has a perfect balance between acidity and sweetness. Do you have cards?" Lucy timidly handed over one of the artisanal cards she had prepared for the occasion, with the name Lucy's Sweet Dreams and her contact number. "I'm Helen Vanderbilt," the woman introduced herself. "I organize charity events for the Renaissance Foundation. We're always looking for quality suppliers. I look forward to your contact." Lucy could hardly believe what she was hearing. The BU Renaissance Foundation was known for bringing together the business elite at its events. Before she could respond adequately, she noticed Edward approaching. "I see you've already discovered our secret find, Mrs. Vanderbilt," he commented, stopping beside the lady. "Edward, darling, where did you find this talented young woman?" asked Helen, still savoring the sweet. "It was more like an accidental encounter," he replied, casting a meaningful look at Lucy, who felt her cheeks flush. "The best encounters usually are," philosophized Mrs. Vanderbilt, before moving away to greet other guests. For a moment, Lucy and Edward were alone in the midst of the crowd. "Everything is perfect," he commented, observing the dessert table. "You've exceeded all expectations." "Thank you for the opportunity," replied Lucy, genuinely grateful. "This means a lot to me." "I have some guests who would like to meet you," said Edward, surprising her. "If you can step away for a few minutes." It was an invitation clearly outside protocol. Suppliers were usually not introduced to VIP guests. "Of course," she agreed, nervous, adjusting her dress and wishing she had something more appropriate for the occasion. Edward led her through the hall, introducing her to various business people as the talented chef responsible for the exceptional sweets. Each introduction was accompanied by a brief comment about how she managed her own business and was expanding her horizons. Lucy struggled to maintain a conversation at their level while inwardly wondering why Edward was doing this. It didn't seem just the cordiality of a satisfied customer. There was something more, a genuine interest in promoting her that she couldn't completely understand. The night advanced, and the event was considered a resounding success. When the last guests began to leave, Lucy started preparations to collect her material. She was exhausted but happy. Her phone had already received several messages from potential clients who had noted her number. "You're not leaving yet, are you?" Edward's voice sounded behind her. Lucy turned, surprised to see him still there. She thought he would have already left with the executives for some exclusive city bar. "I'm just organizing everything," she replied. "It was an incredible night. Thank you again." "I have a proposal," he said somewhat hesitantly, something rare in his normally confident posture. "Would you like to have coffee with me? There's a place nearby that stays open late." The proposal caught her completely off guard. This sounded dangerously like a personal invitation, not professional. "Now?" asked Lucy, looking at her simple dress and imagining her tired face after so many hours of work. "Unless you're too tired," Edward quickly added. "I understand if you prefer to leave it for another day." There was something in the way he said "another day" that made Lucy's heart leap. The implication that there would be other moments beyond the 1-month agreement that was about to end. "Coffee would be great," she replied, surprising herself. "I just need to finish putting away these last pieces." "Let the hotel staff take care of that," offered Edward, gesturing to one of the employees. "I've already arranged for them to pack everything carefully and leave it at reception for you to pick up tomorrow." 20 minutes later, they were seated in an elegant cafe 2 blocks from the hotel. The place had an intimate air, with soft lighting and tables discreetly separated from each other. Edward had removed his tie and unbuttoned the first button of his shirt, looking more relaxed than Lucy had ever seen him. "So," he began after they ordered, "you conquered practically all of my guests today." "I'm glad they liked it," replied Lucy, still feeling out of place in that refined environment. "I never imagined I would have so many contacts in a single night." "You deserve it," said Edward sincerely. "Your work is exceptional. In fact, that's what I want to talk about." He paused, as if organizing his thoughts. "Our 1-month agreement ends in 3 days," he continued. "But I'd like to propose an extension on other terms." Lucy's heart accelerated. She didn't know what to expect. "What terms?" she asked cautiously. "Miller Enterprises is expanding its corporate hospitality sector," explained Edward. "We're acquiring a network of boutique hotels and want to implement a differentiated gastronomy concept focused on authentic experiences." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. "I'd like to hire you as a consultant to develop the pastry line for our breakfasts and events. It would be an initial 6-month contract with the possibility of extension. You would maintain your independent business, of course, but would have access to our structure and team." Lucy was momentarily speechless. "This is unexpected," she finally managed to say. "Did I surprise you?" he asked with a slight smile. Completely, admitted Lucy. I don't understand why me. There must be renowned chefs interested in such a partnership. Precisely because of that, replied Edward, leaning slightly forward. I don't want someone who follows predictable formulas for success. I want authenticity, passion, the ability to create something memorable with limited resources. I've seen that in you since the first day. There was an intensity in his gaze that made Lucy feel a shiver run down her spine. Since the first day? When I threw caramel on your imported car? She joked, trying to alleviate the tension that suddenly hung between them. Edward laughed, a genuine sound that Lucy had never heard before. Maybe not exactly at that moment, he admitted, but certainly the next day, when you appeared punctually, determined to fulfill our strange negotiation. The waiter brought the coffees and a small selection of petit fours that Edward had ordered. Lucy observed the small sweets with a critical professional eye. Good presentation, but the macaron shell is slightly brittle, she commented, momentarily forgetting whom she was talking to. Edward smiled once more. That's exactly why I need you, he said, in a tone that seemed to go beyond the professional proposal. Lucy took a sip of coffee, trying to organize her thoughts. The proposal was tempting, but there was something more happening there, something unspoken that hung between them. May I think about it? She asked. It's an important decision. Of course, agreed Edward. Take all the time you need, but I hope you accept. The conversation flowed to lighter topics. Edward asked about her grandmother, about how she had become interested in pastry. Lucy discovered that he had loved sweets since childhood, but rarely consumed them now due to professional discipline, a rule that had been broken since she began making morning deliveries. In turn, Edward shared some stories of his professional trajectory. The son of a small merchant, he had built his empire practically from scratch after winning a scholarship to a prestigious business school. He wasn't the privileged heir that Lucy had imagined at first. When they looked at the clock, they realized it was already past midnight. I need to go, said Lucy, suddenly aware of the time. The rented van has to be returned by 8 a.m. I can take you home, offered Edward. My driver is waiting, Lucy hesitated. The idea of Edward discovering where she lived, in a simple neighborhood far from downtown, made her uncomfortable. It's not necessary, she politely declined. I've already called a rideshare. Edward seemed to want to insist, but respected her decision. About the proposal, he said as they left the cafe, we can talk more in detail in my office when you decide. Thank you for the opportunity, truly, replied Lucy. I never imagined our accident would lead to something like this. When the rideshare arrived, there was a moment of hesitation between them. Edward extended his hand for a formal farewell, but then, in a surprising impulse, leaned in and lightly kissed Lucy's cheek. See you soon, he said, with a softness that contrasted with his usual posture of a ruthless executive. During the entire journey home, Lucy tried to convince herself that her skin wasn't tingling exactly where his lips had touched, and that Edward Miller's sudden interest was purely professional, but her heart, beating erratically in her chest, strongly disagreed. He offered what? The voice of Clara, Lucy's grandmother, echoed through the small apartment living room. It was family lunch Sunday, the only non-negotiable tradition in the lives of the two. Lucy had just told about Edward's proposal, trying to sound professional and dispassionate, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed her. It's just a consulting contract, Grandma, she explained, distractedly stirring the rice and beans on her plate. 6 months to develop exclusive recipes for his company's hotels. Grandma Clara adjusted her glasses on her nose and studied her granddaughter with the perceptive look of someone who has lived enough to recognize when there's more to the story than is being told. And this Edward Miller, the man whose car you destroyed with caramel, is now offering a contract that could change your professional life? Summarized the elderly lady, raising a gray eyebrow. Interesting how destiny works, don't you think? It was an opportunity that arose after he tasted my sweets, that's all, Lucy defended herself, avoiding her grandmother's gaze. Of course, agreed Grandma Clara with an enigmatic smile. And that message I received just now, asking if you've accepted the proposal, was just professional interest too, Lucy almost choked on her juice. He sent a message to you? How did he get your number? Actually, it was that nice girl, Rebecca. She said her boss is anxious for an answer, clarified Grandma Clara, visibly enjoying her granddaughter's discomfort. Seems like someone is quite interested in working with you, dear. Or in me, thought Lucy, but quickly pushed this thought away. I'll accept, she finally announced. But establishing clear boundaries, it will be strictly professional. Grandma Clara let out a skeptical chuckle. You've always been a terrible liar, my dear, especially to yourself. The following Monday, Lucy arrived at Edward's office for her last delivery of the original agreement. She brought a special cake, an exclusive creation of chocolate with red fruit filling and a subtle touch of pink peppercorn, something she had spent all Sunday perfecting. Rebecca greeted her with a knowing smile. He's waiting, she informed, discreetly winking. Upon entering the office, Lucy noticed something different. Besides the usual side table for the sweets, there was a small round table with 2 chairs by the window. Edward was standing looking at the city view, but turned immediately upon hearing the door. Good morning, he greeted with a smile that seemed genuinely happy to see her. Our last delivery of the original agreement. I brought something special to mark the occasion, replied Lucy, placing the cake on the table. Edward approached to examine the creation. It was impeccably decorated, with artistic work in chocolate that resembled abstract brushstrokes. It looks like a work of art, he commented, genuinely impressed. I hope the flavor lives up to the appearance, said Lucy, beginning to serve the coffee as usual. Why don't we sit down? Suggested Edward, indicating the prepared table. I'd like to discuss the terms of the contract, if you already have an answer to my proposal. Lucy's heart accelerated. This seemed much more intimate than their previous interactions. Yes, I have an answer, she confirmed, sitting with her back straight in the indicated chair. Edward served 2 cups of coffee and cut 2 slices of the cake, placing them on fine porcelain plates. There was a natural elegance in his movements that fascinated Lucy. Before you answer, he said, sitting across from her, I'd like to clarify some points. This is not a charity offer or a momentary whim. I've observed your work, your ethics, your creativity. What I propose is a genuinely professional partnership that I believe will be beneficial for both parties. He paused to taste the cake. Extraordinary, he commented, briefly closing his eyes to savor. The balance between the sweetness of the chocolate, the acidity of the fruit, and the spicy touch of the pink peppercorn. It's precisely this kind of innovation I want for our ventures. I accept the proposal, Lucy replied directly. But I have some conditions. Edward raised his eyebrows, interested. And what would those be? First, I maintain total creative autonomy. Second, I need to continue with my cart for a few hours a week. I have loyal customers I don't want to abandon. Third, I want a contract that allows me to develop my own brand within the products I create for you. The determination in Lucy's gaze was evident. Edward smiled, clearly approving of her stance. I accept all conditions, he promptly agreed. In fact, I had already included similar clauses in the contract, presuming you would value your independence. He removed a folder from his desk and handed Lucy a well-prepared document. Take it home, analyze it carefully. Consult a lawyer if you prefer. I'm open to adjustments. Lucy quickly leafed through the contract, impressed with the clarity of the terms and especially with the proposed compensation, much higher than she had ever imagined receiving. This is very generous, she commented, suddenly feeling vulnerable. It's the market value for a talent like yours, Edward replied with simplicity. Actually, it could be more, but I imagined you would feel uncomfortable with a very drastic change at first. The perception that he had considered her feelings and possible discomfort deeply touched Lucy. Thank you for thinking of that, she said sincerely. You're right, I prefer to start this way and prove my worth with work. Edward studied her for a moment, as if he were making an important decision. There's something else I'd like to discuss, he finally said. I'm organizing a weekend at the company's beach house for some important executives and partners. I'd like you to participate, not just to meet the people you'll be working with, but also to have a first experience with the kind of environment we want to create in our boutique hotels. Lucy hesitated. A weekend at a beach house sounded dangerously personal. It would be in a professional capacity, right? She asked cautiously. Completely, assured Edward. You would have your own room, obviously. The idea is to introduce you as our new gastronomic consultant and give you the opportunity to meet the hospitality team. Still hesitant, Lucy pondered. For a moment, when would it be? Next weekend, from Friday to Sunday, he informed. I understand if it's too short notice or if you have other commitments. Something in his tone suggested a genuine expectation that she would accept. Lucy thought of her grandmother, with whom she normally spent Sundays, but knew that Grandma Clara would encourage her to take advantage of the opportunity. I'll go, she decided, trying to ignore the slight tremor in her voice. It seems like a good opportunity to better understand the project. The smile that spread across Edward's face was different from any other she had seen. Relaxed, genuinely happy, almost as if... No, she wouldn't follow that line of thought. Excellent, he said, quickly regaining his professional composure. Rebecca will send you all the details. A driver will pick you up Friday afternoon. The rest of the meeting proceeded with discussions about the first projects Lucy would develop. Edward showed her photos of the hotels already acquired by the company and explained the vision he had for each establishment, spaces that combined sophistication with warmth, luxury with authenticity. When lunchtime approached, Lucy began to gather her things to leave. Thank you for the opportunity, truly, she said, holding the folder with the contract. I'll analyze everything carefully tonight. The decision was purely based on merit, replied Edward, accompanying her to the door. Then, in a lower voice, he added, although I must admit it will be a pleasure to work more closely with you. The comment, seemingly innocent, made Lucy's heart race. She said goodbye with a polite smile and left, feeling his gaze follow her to the elevator. A weekend at the beach? Exclaimed Gina, when Lucy shared the news during coffee the following afternoon. This is getting more and more interesting. It's strictly professional, insisted Lucy, rolling her eyes. I'm going to meet the team, better understand the concept of the hotels, and spend 2 days close to the man who is clearly interested in more than your sweets, completed her friend, with a mischievous smile. It's nothing like that, protested Lucy, although a blush insisted on coloring her cheeks. Edward Miller is an astute businessman who recognized a business opportunity. That's all. Then why do you blush every time you mention his name? Teased Gina. Because you keep insinuating things. Lucy defended herself, nervously fidgeting with her cup. Gina assumed a more serious expression, leaning over the table. Lucy, you know I'm your friend, and only want what's best for you, right? She waited for Lucy to nod before continuing. Then listen to me, be careful. I'm not saying he has bad intentions, but you are from very different worlds. Men like Edward Miller often see people like us as temporary entertainment. There's nothing happening between us, Lucy reaffirmed, although something in her chest contracted painfully upon hearing her friend's words. Yet, corrected Gina, but there's an obvious tension. I'm just asking you to protect your heart as well as your career. Lucy knew her friend was right. As much as she tried to convince herself otherwise, there was something growing between her and Edward, looks that lasted too long, smiles that seemed reserved only for particular moments, a connection that transcended simple professional interest. I'll be careful, she promised, both to her friend and to herself. The week passed in a whirlwind of activities. Lucy had signed the contract after consulting a lawyer recommended by an old client. She made a point of bearing the costs of the consultation, even though they were high for her budget. She wanted to be absolutely certain that she was making an informed and safe decision. In parallel, she began to prepare for the weekend at the beach. Anxiety grew with each day, manifesting in small details. The obsessive checking of the weather forecast, the careful choice of clothes she would take, the planning of some culinary ideas to impress the other participants. On Thursday night, while packing her suitcase, she received a message from an unknown number. Hope you're excited for tomorrow. I'm sure everyone will be charmed by you, just as I've been since our first meeting. Sleep well, Edward. Lucy stared at the cell phone screen for long minutes, her heart beating rapidly. It was the first personal message she had received from him outside the strictly professional context. She typed and deleted several responses, before finally sending, "Thank you. I'm looking forward to meeting the team and contributing to the project. See you tomorrow." Formal, contained, safe. Exactly. The opposite of what she felt. As she finished packing her suitcase, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to cross an important threshold in her life. Something told her that, after this weekend, nothing would be the same. For better or worse, her story with Edward Miller was just beginning. The Miller Enterprises beach house was far from what Lucy had imagined. When the driver stopped in front of the property, she had to contain an exclamation of surprise. It wasn't a simple house, but a contemporary mansion with a panoramic view of the sea, built on different levels that followed the natural slope of the terrain. Made primarily of glass, concrete, and wood, the construction seemed to emerge organically among the preserved native vegetation. An artificial waterfall descended through carefully arranged stones next to the main entrance, creating an environment of immediate serenity. "We've arrived, miss," announced the driver, opening the door for her. "Mr. Miller asked me to inform you that some guests have already arrived. I can take your luggage." Lucy got out of the car, feeling her heart race. She wore a simple but elegant outfit of linen pants and a cotton blouse, a combination she had carefully chosen to look professional without being too formal for a beach house. Before she could reach the entrance, the glass door opened and Edward appeared, wearing beige shorts and a light button-up shirt, an informality that made him even more attractive. Lucy swallowed hard, trying to control her reaction. "Welcome," he greeted with a warm smile, approaching for a kiss on the cheek that seemed to last a second longer than conventional. "Was the trip smooth?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, trying to sound natural. "This place is amazing." "I'm glad you liked it," said Edward. "Come, I want to introduce you to the others." He placed his hand lightly on her back, guiding her inside. The touch, even gentle and brief, sent a wave of heat through Lucy's body. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. Spacious rooms with double-height ceilings, minimalist but welcoming decor, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the ocean like living works of art. In the external area, by the infinity pool that seemed to merge with the sea on the horizon, about 10 people were gathered, chatting animatedly with colorful drinks in their hands. "Everyone," called Edward, approaching the group with Lucy. "This is Lucy Fields, the talented chef I mentioned. She has just joined the company as our gastronomy consultant for the new line of boutique hotels." Everyone turned with expressions of interest. Lucy immediately recognized Rebecca, who smiled encouragingly. The others were new faces, 3 middle-aged men with executive appearances, 2 elegantly dressed women who appeared to be in their 40s, a young couple, and a gentleman with grey hair who radiated authority. "Welcome to our little retreat, Lucy," said the grey-haired gentleman, approaching to greet her. "I'm Robert Miller, father of this stubborn young man who is finally having some good ideas for the business." Lucy shook his hand, surprised. She hadn't expected to meet the family patriarch. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Miller," she replied politely. "Please call me Robert," he insisted with a warm smile. "Edward hasn't stopped talking about your culinary talents. I confess I'm anxious to experience them." A slight blush colored Edward's cheeks, something Lucy had never imagined seeing. "Dad, don't exaggerate," he muttered before continuing with the introductions. The other guests were a mixture of company executives and external consultants who worked on the boutique hotel project. The young couple, Mark and Danielle, was responsible for interior design and seemed genuinely interested in Lucy's vision of how gastronomy could integrate with the overall concept. "Edward showed us photos of your suites," commented Danielle, enthusiastically. "We'd love to discuss how we can design spaces that complement your creations." "That would be wonderful," replied Lucy, feeling more at ease upon realizing that she was really respected as a professional. The afternoon proceeded in a surprisingly pleasant manner. The group was relaxed, despite the power and influence they clearly possessed. Lucy was naturally included in the conversations, her opinions solicited and valued. Robert Miller, especially, seemed enchanted with her, asking detailed questions about her background and how she had developed her culinary style. At one point, while the others were distracted by the pool, he invited her for a walk around the property. "Edward told me about your unusual first meeting," he commented, as they followed a stone path between tropical gardens. "The caramel incident with the car." Lucy smiled, more relaxed now. "It wasn't my proudest moment," she admitted, "but it ended up being a happy accident, considering where we are now." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "You know, in 50 years of business, I've learned that the most significant encounters often begin in unexpected ways," he said. "Life has a curious way of connecting us with the right people through the most unlikely events." There was something in his tone that made Lucy wonder if they were really just talking about business. "You seem, Robert, to believe strongly in destiny," she observed. "Let's say I believe in recognizing opportunities when they arise, whether in business or personal life," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "My son has always been brilliant in business, but perhaps he needs some guidance in other aspects of life." Before Lucy could fully process what that meant, Robert changed the subject, asking about her ideas for hotel breakfasts. The conversation moved to safer ground, but his words continued to echo in her mind. Upon returning to the house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with dramatic shades of orange and pink. The guests had retreated to prepare for dinner except Edward, who was waiting for them on the veranda. "I hope my father wasn't too invasive," he commented when Robert moved away to get a drink. "He can be quite direct sometimes." "On the contrary, it was a very pleasant conversation," replied Lucy sincerely. "He asked me interesting questions about my gastronomic vision." Edward observed her for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but only smiled. "Your room is ready if you want to rest a bit before dinner," he offered. "Second door on the right in the east corridor. It has a view of the sea." Lucy thanked him and headed to the indicated room. It was an elegant and cozy space, with a private balcony facing the ocean. Her luggage had already been placed on an upholstered bench at the foot of the huge king-size bed. While unpacking, she reflected on the day's interactions. It was undeniable that she had been well received by the group, but it was also impossible to ignore the looks she occasionally caught between Edward and his father, or Rebecca's subtly ambiguous comments. She decided to take a quick shower to refresh herself. Under the warm water jet, she finally allowed herself to confess what she had been trying to deny. She was inexplicably attracted to Edward Miller, and with each interaction, each smile, each look, it became more difficult to maintain the professional distance she had promised herself. "This is madness," she thought while dressing for dinner, opting for a simple but elegant dress in navy blue. "We are from completely different worlds. He's probably just being kind, and I'm interpreting everything wrong." Dinner was served on the spacious veranda, under a starry sky and illuminated by lanterns strategically positioned. The table had been artistically arranged with tropical flowers and floating candles, creating an atmosphere of relaxed sophistication. Lucy noticed that her place was designated next to Edward, with Robert on her other side. When everyone was seated, Edward stood up with a champagne flute. "I'd like to propose a toast to this new and exciting chapter in the family business," he said, his gaze sweeping the table before resting on Lucy, "and to the talented people who will help us transform our vision into reality." Everyone raised their glasses. Lucy felt her face burn when Edward kept his gaze on her for a moment longer than necessary. The dinner proceeded magnificently. The dishes prepared by a private chef were delicious and presented with elegance. Lucy observed every detail attentively, absorbing ideas and techniques she could adapt for her own creations. At one point, while conversation flowed animatedly around the table, Edward leaned slightly in her direction. "What do you think of the food?" he asked in a low voice just for her to hear. "Impeccable," Lucy honestly replied. "The presentation, the flavors, everything perfectly balanced." "But," he pressed, noticing her hesitation. Lucy smiled, surprised that he had captured her unexpressed reservation. "It lacks a bit of soul," she confessed. "It's technically perfect, but it doesn't have that special touch that makes you remember the meal days later." Edward studied her with an approving look. "Exactly what I thought," he agreed. "That's why you're here. We need that authenticity. That personal touch that transforms a perfect meal into a memorable experience. There was something in the way he said, "You're here," that made Lucy's heart race. It wasn't just a professional comment. There was an additional layer of meaning that she couldn't ignore. After dinner, the group naturally dispersed. Some opted for drinks in the living room, others for a moonlit walk on the beach. Lucy found herself momentarily alone on the veranda, admiring the ocean illuminated by the full moon. "Impressive view, isn't it?" Edward's voice emerged behind her, making her slightly startle. "Absolutely," she agreed, trying to control the inexplicable nervousness she felt in his presence. "I've never seen anything like it." He approached, stopping beside her at the balustrade. For a few minutes they remained in contemplative silence, watching the waves break on the beach below. "Thank you for coming," he finally said, turning slightly in her direction. "I know it might have seemed strange, inviting you for a weekend like this so early in our professional partnership." Lucy noticed the hesitation before the last words. "I confess I was a bit apprehensive," she admitted, "but I'm happy I accepted. Your team is amazing, and I can already visualize many possibilities for the project." Edward smiled, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Always so focused on work," he observed, with something that seemed like admiration in his voice. "But I hope you also enjoy some of this weekend to relax. You deserve it, after all the effort of the last few weeks." His gaze was intense, almost magnetic, and Lucy felt unable to look away. "Edward," she began, not knowing exactly what she wanted to say. He took a step in her direction, reducing the space between them. "Yes?" he gently encouraged. The moment was interrupted by laughter coming from the house. Robert and some of the other guests were heading to the veranda. Edward discreetly stepped back, the intimate moment dissolving into the night. "Ah, there you are," exclaimed Robert cheerfully. "We were thinking of playing a few rounds of cards. Would you like to join us?" "Sure," Edward replied quickly, regaining his composure. "Lucy?" "Why not?" she agreed with a smile, feeling both relief and disappointment at the interruption. The rest of the night proceeded in a relaxed atmosphere of games and conversations. Late at night, when everyone began to retire, Lucy headed to her room with swirling thoughts. It was increasingly difficult to maintain the distinction between professional and personal. Something was growing between her and Edward, something that went beyond mutual admiration for their respective skills. The tension was almost palpable, like a stretched rope about to break. As she lay in the comfortable bed, looking at the ceiling, Lucy knew she faced a difficult choice: to remain true to her resolution to separate work and feelings, or to allow herself to explore the undeniable connection that was forming. The sound of waves breaking on the beach lulled her restless sleep, while in her dreams, melted caramel and intense gazes mixed in a disconcerting dance. The second day at the beach house dawned with an impeccably blue sky and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the sea. Lucy woke up early as usual, surprised by the quietness of the house. Apparently she was the first to rise. She wore light clothes and decided to explore the beach while everyone slept. However, as she passed through the main room, she noticed a silhouette on the veranda. Edward was sitting in one of the lounges, a cup of coffee in his hands, looking at the horizon. For a moment Lucy considered discreetly retreating, but he turned as if sensing her presence. "Good morning," he greeted, smiling. "Early riser as always, I see." "Pastry chef habit," replied Lucy, approaching. "Years of waking up before sunrise to prepare doughs leave marks on our rhythms." "Coffee," he offered, indicating the coffee maker on the side table. "I just made it." Lucy accepted the invitation, serving herself a cup and sitting in the lounger beside him. For a few minutes they contemplated the sea in comfortable silence. "Do you have plans for today?" Edward finally asked. "I thought about walking to that rock formation," she replied, pointing to a distant promontory on the beach. "It seems like a good place to think." "It is," he agreed. "There's a small cove on the other side, practically unknown to tourists. I can show you if you want company." There was a hesitation in his voice, as if he feared being intrusive. Lucy felt a wave of affection for this more vulnerable facet that he rarely showed. "I'd love that," she accepted sincerely. They finished their coffee, talking about light subjects, Favorite movies, childhood memories, first professional experiences. It was strange how, outside the corporate context, Edward transformed into someone completely different. Relaxed, good-humored, almost boyish in his enthusiasm for small things. An hour later, they walked barefoot on the wet sand, leaving behind the house that was now beginning to awaken. Edward occasionally pointed to interesting geological formations or rare seabirds, revealing a surprising knowledge about the region. "I've been coming to this beach since childhood," he explained when Lucy commented on this. "Before being a corporate property, it was the family's summer house. I spent all my summers here until I was 18. "It must have been wonderful to grow up with this paradise as your backyard," observed Lucy, imagining young Edward running on the sands. "It was," he confirmed, smiling nostalgically. "Perhaps that's why I insisted so much on converting this property into part of the boutique hotel project, instead of simply selling it as some shareholders wanted. There are too many memories here." As they approached the rocky promontory, Edward indicated a path between the rocks. "Careful where you step," he warned, offering his hand to help her. "These rocks can be treacherous when wet." Lucy hesitated for a second before accepting the extended hand. The contact sent an electric current through her arm, but she tried to ignore the sensation. She concentrated on following the indicated path, allowing Edward to guide her through the narrower passages. After a few minutes of careful climbing, they reached the other side of the promontory. Lucy stopped, marveling at the sight, a small cove in the shape of a half-moon, surrounded by verdant cliffs, with crystal-clear waters in shades of turquoise that seemed to have come from a postcard. "It's absolutely stunning," she whispered, as if speaking loudly could break the enchantment of the place. "My secret refuge during adolescence," confided Edward, still holding her hand without seeming conscious of it. "I came here when I needed to escape the expectations, the plans my father traced for my future." There was a vulnerability in his voice that Lucy had never heard before. She turned to look at him and found his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart leap. "I've never brought anyone here before," he added softly. Lucy felt the weight of that revelation. It wasn't just a place. It was a part of him he was sharing, something precious and private. "Thank you for trusting me," she said simply. Edward smiled, a smile different from all she had seen on his face, without traces of his usual arrogant confidence, just a genuine joy, almost shy. They descended to the immaculate sand, finally releasing hands. Lucy walked to the water's edge, allowing the gentle waves to wet her feet. Edward remained a few steps behind, observing her. "What are you thinking?" he asked after a few moments. Lucy hesitated, uncertain if she should share her true thoughts. She decided to risk honesty. "I'm thinking about how unpredictable life is," she replied, turning to face him. "Just over a month ago, I was desperately running to deliver an order when I spilled caramel on the car of an arrogant executive I'd never seen in my life. Now I'm here, in this incredible place, with that same man who has revealed himself to be completely different from what I imagined." Edward laughed softly, approaching. "And I'm thinking about how that was the best accident of my life," he confessed, stopping just inches from her. "Although I have to admit, I didn't think so at the time." The air between them seemed charged with electricity. Lucy knew they were on the verge of something transformative, a point of no return. "Edward," she began hesitantly, "this is complicated. We're business partners now." "It's more than that, and you know it," he replied, his voice barely more than a whisper. "From the beginning, it was always more than that." He slowly raised his hand, giving her all the time in the world to step back if she wanted, and touched her face with delicacy. Lucy briefly closed her eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into the touch. "I'm afraid," she admitted, opening her eyes to face him, "our worlds are completely different." "Maybe they're not as different as you think," argued Edward. "We're two people who value authenticity, passion for what we do, and integrity. The rest is just circumstances." There was so much sincerity in his words that Lucy felt her last defenses crumble. When Edward leaned in, she met his lips halfway. The kiss was soft initially, almost reverent, as if both were testing a fragile dream that could dissipate at any moment. Soon, however, it deepened with an intensity that left them breathless. When they finally parted, they remained with their foreheads together, breathing the same air, hands intertwined between them. "This complicates everything, doesn't it?" whispered Lucy with a small smile. "Or maybe it simplifies things," replied Edward. "Now at least we don't have to pretend there's only professional interest between us." They laughed together, a newly discovered complicity establishing itself between them. They spent the rest of the morning on that private beach, talking with an honesty that's only possible when all masks fall. Edward told about the constant pressure of managing the empire built by his father, the sleepless nights worrying about the thousands of employees who depended on his decisions. Lucy shared her fears of never achieving enough financial stability to properly care for her grandmother, and how sometimes she felt suffocated by the responsibility. "That's why I've always been so disciplined," she explained, while drawing patterns in the sand. "There's no safety net for me. One mistake can mean not being able to pay the rent or grandma's medicine." "That explains your reaction when you spilled the caramel," commented Edward with an understanding smile. "For you, it wasn't just an accident. It was a threat to your survival." Lucy nodded, surprised that he understood so perfectly. "And for you, it was just another inconvenience in a day full of them," she observed. "Not exactly," he corrected. "It was more proof that I was losing control over my own life, always running from one meeting to another, with no time to breathe. I think that's why I reacted so disproportionately." The sun was high when they decided to return to the house. The way back was traversed hand in hand, pausing occasionally for a kiss or to admire some peculiarity of the beach. As they approached the property, however, Edward stopped, his countenance suddenly serious. "Lucy, before we return to reality up there, I want you to know something," he said, holding both her hands. "Whatever happens between us, it won't affect our professional agreement. Your talent is undeniable, and the company needs you regardless of us." "Thank you for that," she replied sincerely. "Although I'm not sure how we're going to manage this situation." "One day at a time," he suggested with a hopeful smile. She nodded, returning the smile. One day at a time. When they returned to the house, they were received by Robert, who observed them from the veranda with an indecipherably satisfied expression. "Great day for a beach walk," he commented casually, although his perceptive eyes noticed the joined hands that only separated at the last moment. "Lunch will be served soon. Lucy, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of asking the chef to prepare something special, following some of the recipes you mentioned yesterday." "Not at all," she replied, feeling her face flush under the knowing look of the older man. During lunch, Lucy noticed the exchanges of glances between Edward and his father, and the barely disguised smiles of Rebecca, who seemed equally aware of the change in dynamics between them. Surprisingly, she didn't feel embarrassed, just slightly uncomfortable for being so transparent. The afternoon was dedicated to professional discussions. Lucy formally presented some of her ideas for the gastronomic concept of the boutique hotels, receiving enthusiastic feedback from the group. When she mentioned her intention to incorporate local ingredients and traditional techniques from each region where the hotels would be installed, Robert applauded. "Exactly what we were looking for," he declared. "Authenticity with sophistication." "Edward was right about you." The project was taking shape, and Lucy felt genuinely excited about the professional possibilities opening up. But now there was another dimension in her life, one that scared and excited her in equal measure. On the last night at the beach house, after a relaxed dinner, Edward invited her for a moonlit walk. They walked along the shore in comfortable silence for some time until he stopped and turned to her. "These last few days have been revealing," he said, "and not just professionally." Lucy smiled, feeling her heart accelerate. "I agree," she replied simply. "I know we're just beginning and that there are many challenges ahead," continued Edward. "We're from different worlds, with different baggage. But I want you to know that I'm willing to face any obstacle if you're by my side." The intensity of his declaration caught her by surprise. It wasn't just an admission of feelings, but a commitment. "Edward, this is—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Too fast?" he completed, with a self-conscious smile. "Probably." But if there's something I've learned in business, it's recognizing an extraordinary opportunity when it arises. And you, Lucy Fields, are the most extraordinary person I've ever met." Unexpected tears appeared in her eyes. "I never imagined that an accident with caramel would bring me here," she said with a choked voice. "The most well-employed caramel in history," he joked, pulling her into his arms. Under the starry sky, with the sound of waves as a soundtrack, they sealed with a kiss the beginning of a journey that neither could have predicted. A journey that had begun with spilled caramel and an unusual debt, and that now promised a future as sweet as Lucy's creations. And although Edward's corporate world was very different from Lucy's small universe of artisanal pastry, both knew they had found something rare and precious, an authentic connection that transcended circumstances and conventions. A connection that, like the best of sweets, had the perfect balance between acidity and sweetness, complexity and simplicity, tradition and innovation, the perfect recipe for an unexpected love. Just like the caramel that sealed Lucy and Edward's fate, I hope this story has left a sweet taste in your heart. Sometimes, life's accidents lead us to our best moments, just like this sweet agreement that began with a disaster and ended in love. If you delighted in this narrative as much as Lucy did with her culinary creations, don't forget to leave your like. Each one is like an essential ingredient that motivates us to continue telling stories that warm the soul. To not miss our next literary recipes, subscribe to our channel. We have a special playlist with other stories of unexpected encounters, new beginnings, and loves that defy circumstances. Just click on the icon to your left. And what would a good dessert be without the final touch? Leave in the comments your favorite moment of this story, or tell us about some happy accident that changed your life. Your participation is what makes our community as special as Lucy's artisanal pastry. We'll be back tomorrow with a new story to sweeten your day.